How's it going, man?
That's good. How are you?
Doing pretty well. Now that we got that figured out, it's a work in progress trying to figure out how this all this technology works. So,
yeah, full disclosure, I was actually connecting with you on a Chromebook.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it's an integration of that, but it's working on the phone.
Awesome.
So.
Yeah, I think that's probably the best way is probably to do it through the phone next time, and from a higher angle for my preference, so you don't show all this. But I can work that in a whole separate feed of that. So I was telling everybody that
I had a foot. Yeah. Go ahead.
I was telling everybody I was about you and about how we know each other through Las Vegas radio and how we came up that way. And I tell people all the time that you're in a fraternity of about 3 or 4 people, of the smartest people I know. Actually, 5 people. I'll include Tracy Teagarden on that in that fraternity. So basically,
he's kind of more of a
timer. Go ahead. A little bit of
I was going to say Tracy Teagarden's more of the kind of Spock style intelligence, which is a totally different level. But
yes,
yeah.
So the talking about things like risk exposure, and I've always been very intrigued by this topic because, and you brought it up a couple of years ago, and I said you always need to do a video on this. I think that something like that needs to be talked about, and a lot of people don't know about. What exactly is that when it comes to going into a proposal or a job, or you're trying to sell something like that nature?
In a way, it's kind of like, when you're taught to interact with people, having empathy for someone's other side is the emotional side of it. The more tactical and business side is risk, because most people sit there and try to judge things as whether this is fair. Whereas really in reality in business, what you're trying to find is something that is as close to equitable as possible. So it also takes a lot of emotion out of things. Like if you're working with an employer and the employer is making decisions that, are upsetting you, if you look at it from a risk standpoint, it's much easier for you to not get as upset about it. Trying to give a good example. So for instance, if an employer wants to hire you at $50,000 a year, but then tells you that they intend to make $10 million in new sales, from your efforts, what you can infer from that is 2 things. One, the emotional side, like, oh, that's a cheap son of a bitch. Why is he going to pay me so little? Which is kind of using your emotional side. Or you can look at it from the risk side, and you can say on the risk side of it, he's telling me that he wants to produce $10 million, but based on what he's paying me, he doesn't believe it's going to happen. So he's shifting the risk over to you in the hopes that you can succeed. So you could very easily, instead of saying, oh, you cheap SOB, why are you not paying me anything? It's like, well, based on the fact you want $10 million from me, I'm probably worth at least $150,000 or $200,000 because I'm only talking about 5% of what you would actually accrue over that period of time. Right. It's much better to have that kind of conversation by saying, hey, I'm worth more than that. It's like, well, okay, prove it. So now you're on the defensive with that. It's much easier to say, based on what you just said, for what you're going to pay me, I don't believe you're going to get there, and I'll tell you why. And he goes, no, I'm 100% sure I'm going to get there. And then you say, okay, based on what you said, then you would not mind taking a little bit more of a risk to actually pay for the talent that you believe can actually take you from 0 to 10 million. You see, it's so much better than saying that's not fair, or why don't you value me? It's like, it's not that. It's really internally that person has a risk that they have to take, and they're trying to mitigate it to a point where they're whole. The problem is a lot of people want to push it all the way to one side. And some people are too generous and they push it all the way to themselves, but it really needs to be in the middle. So in that scenario of $10 million, suppose the guy comes to me and says, I'm going to pay you $5 million this year because I expect $10 million back. He's going to lose in that bet.
Right.
Right. Now, somebody who should be honest should tell somebody, I can't take that because I know that you're going to pay half of the cost of this. Most people won't. I mean, they'll take the money, but that's kind of a small snippet of how you look at risk. Everybody has to take a risk in something, and the number one goal is to try to shift it as much as possible to one side away from them. But ultimately, the best deals happen when the risk is pretty close to even in terms of or equitable. It's a centrally balanced kind of thing, and we encounter that all the time, especially with situations that I've been in. One time getting out of radio and getting into the collision business, it was a risk on the business owner's side because he was paying me fairly well.
But at the same time, there's no guarantee. I didn't put something in the agreement to ensure that a long-term play be carried out. So there was no 12-month or 24-month guarantee of what I was making in return for what I was doing for him. Instead, he literally gave me 3 months to move the needle, as he spoke, on a digital advertising and marketing side of things. This was back in 2013, and he was just, shiny object syndrome all the way, and, always just kind of knee-jerk reacted to stuff. Not a problem, Chris Hawkins. He says, I like this guy. I'll be back to watch later, gentlemen. Chris Hawkins, great graphic arts guy and web designer out of Texas, I believe, or Louisiana. But basically, also in the car business, situations that I was in where a lot of the risk was shifted over to us, meaning that every time we turned around, we were, being costed something from something that we didn't even really wasn't our fault. Okay. In terms of, a lot of the responsibilities that should have been shifted to a concierge or an assistant, bringing vehicles to get emissioned and, filling up with gas after you make a sale and getting them the detail. A lot of that was shifted to us. They had a guarantee of, it was a draw against commission. So it wasn't really any risk from the dealership other than the typical risks that come with running a dealership. We were almost like 1099 employees, but we were employees because we were told to show up at a certain time and things of that nature. So,
which is the worst because you don't even get the tax benefits of being pure play with a W-2. So the risk is way too much on your side. So,
experiencing the both of that, and you had actually talked about a recent thing with you, no names mentioned, but you told me a scenario where you had two previous instances of working. It was basically we worked for the same thing, but there was a gotcha that you worked into your contract, and I think that was a great topic of conversation. If you want to talk about it, I think that was a great story.
Oh, sure, yeah, sure. So I had an opportunity to go back into an industry in which I once worked, and I had learned a lot in the past about how contracts work in this particular industry. And the thing that I always find is that, and this is kind of a universal norm, people or companies want to keep you in a contract forever is what they'll tell you, but it's really until they don't want you or can't pay you. So they want to lock you down for all these periods of time. And then when they're ready to jettison you, they just do it. So I learned a long time ago that if somebody's going to give you a contract that's, say, for 3 years, if they decide to end that contract, you have to shift some risks back and say, listen, if you do this for less than a period of time, you're going to owe me some months of pay. I mean, it's as simple as that, and it was good because when that situation happened where they said, hey, listen, we've had some budget cuts and I want to keep you, but we got to make some changes here because they're not going to continue to pay it. I smiled at this person and he goes, why are you laughing? I said, because you owe me money. I said, did you forget that I actually countered with that? And then they went, really? I said, yeah. I said, thank you for giving me a 4-month vacation because that's what I'm getting today unless you change your mind now and want to keep me on.
Yeah.
And he says, no, I can't do it. I said, well, I go, does your boss know that you did this? And he goes, I don't know if they actually remember that. I said, well, anyway, I'm looking forward to the money. Just go ahead and send it to me on the next payroll and I'm good. And I'm going to go take a trip with my family. And I did. So, but notice that when I do that, I didn't get mad. And the reason why is because on the front end, I mitigated my risk to a point where if something did happen, I'm not going to walk away angry. Had I not done that and just said, hey, we're always going to take care of you, and you get wrapped up in the emotion and say, oh, good, I'm going to be here for all this period of time, and then you get that hammer dropped on you and you have no fallback, yeah, that's when you get pissed off, right? Yeah. So I think it's important. Now, the industry that you and I worked in terms of the radio business, one of the biggest challenges that I see with how they operate, and they've never changed, from the time that we were in it in the late 90s, even today, is that when somebody starts out new in the business, they give them too little bit of a ramp time and too little bit of money on the front end. And then they're surprised when that employee does things that are wrong. They act in desperation, and sometimes they even steal. Mm-hmm. And it's not just radio, but there was a consulting deal that I did a few months back with a not professional services, but home services company. Mm-hmm. And this guy was so paranoid. He said, he goes, all my employees do is steal from me and they're all dishonest and you got to watch what they're doing because they're nuts. And I went, wow. I said, so you have 11 people working here and they're all stealing from you? And so I started looking into his compensation plan. Mm-hmm. His compensation plan was basically whatever they did for the week, they created an average. And then from that average, he created this really cockamamie payment plan that started with, if you're at par, you make a certain percentage. If you're a certain amount, you make higher, then it accelerates. But if you're below that average, it drops. And so I said, okay, on the surface, that looks good. But when you come to me and say, I'm really surprised that this guy did what he did, 2 weeks after, after this period of time where maybe he had a bad week. So maybe he had really good sales, like well above what would be considered good, but someone else had a stellar week and blew the curve. Mm-hmm. So instead of that guy getting what he should be getting in terms of his normal compensation for what he considered to be a good week and actually well above average of what the company does, he ended up getting socked, several percent because someone got a bluebird that week. So what does the guy do next week? He sandbags a deal, throws it in there to get his average up, and then he gets caught. And he's like, well, this guy's a thief. I said, no, he's not a thief. What the problem is that you've shifted the risk of this plan to your employees, and these people have to pay for their children and their obligations and everything else. And they go in full speed ahead, and you're thinking that this plan works, but every single week someone does great and someone gets FUCKED. Mm-hmm. All right. So then the morale of the situation is, show me the rules where I can't delay submitting an order or delay submitting a bid for something. I said, you call that stealing. This is just them preserving themselves because they don't think it's fair. Instead of making 20% on something they did really well on, you just gave them 10 because someone else got lucky on a deal. I said, you can't do that. I said, so they're not thieves. They're just not understanding that this plan does not work for them consistently. And he says, well, how can I solve it? I said, some mechanism in place that allows you to strike out a low and a high score. It's kind of like ice skating. I mean, when you look at an ice skater, they throw out the low and the high, and the middle is what you get. I said, you have to do something to smooth this curve out because it looks good. But really how the employee sees it is, you've had a really good week and someone's had a really great week, so they get screwed, and you actually make more money off of what he just made instead of it being paid to him. I said, they think you're stealing from them.
Yeah. And it's funny that you mentioned that. They're working within the parameters that are set to them, and they're working the pay plan.
That's right.
Essentially, that's all they're doing.
But you notice that his emotional response. I said, This is not about emotion, it's about risk. I said, people have real risk. The kind of person who does this job has a wife, 2 kids, maybe it's a stay-at-home mom, he's a sole earner, and it's right around the holidays. What do you think somebody would do to ensure that the kid, what was that movie, Trading Places? Mm-hmm. With Eddie Murphy, where he sits there and he goes, now I'd be worried about this stock market because my wife wants me to get the kid, the toy with the Kung Fu grip. And if I can't get that, my wife won't sleep with me. And, all of those bits and that part, it's like, but human beings have that. It's like, okay, so it's right after Thanksgiving. You're working super, super hard to make sure that you get that extra money so you can buy your kids presents. And all of a sudden somebody just got a lucky call that was not through his own effort, but just somebody said, hey, I need this service done that is just so over the top. And it blew out the entire curve that instead of this guy getting maybe an extra $1,000 a week in incentive, he gets like $200. Yeah. So now what you have is the owner of the company saying, you're stealing from me, because what the guy's trying to do is make up for that because he has expectations. And then you also have the employee going, right around the holidays, how can you sit there and screw me out of my money? I got to buy presents for my kids.
Yeah.
And nobody's looking at it from a logic or a risk standpoint. They're looking at it from pure emotion. And I said, this isn't sustainable. I said, that's why you have such high turnover. I said, because you've never actually looked at it this way.
So I've actually had an instance.
Because people quit after that.
I had an instance that was similar to that when I was in the car business. And this was kind of the first straw, I guess the beginning of the straws that were beginning to break the camel's back. Came off of couple good months, did really well. I had, we were bonused on surveys and things of that nature, and there was built into the pay plan to get like an extra $100 per survey that you got that was above board. So basically, they decided at the beginning of December, or actually a little bit past December, to flip a switch and make your pay plan, your survey money, your surveys tied to your bonus money that you got from the actual brand. So if that makes sense. So we had 3 different ways to get paid. It was commission. You could make money by getting good surveys of like $100 a car per new car. So you could do pretty well with it. It was reasonable, but they kept on ratcheting that down over the previous years. But I won't even get into that. And the third way was to make spin money from certain programs on cars that Mercedes would have. So I earned, I believe in November, something like $2,500 in spin money, telling my kids all year long, hey, I hear that towards the end of the year, it's going to be raining money in this place. It was my first year into this particular brand and that business. And They pull me in. I had one bad survey in November from somebody who quite honestly just couldn't be pleased. They were used to doing business a certain way. We couldn't accommodate. I mean, we literally sold her a car in a time span of 2.5 hours. That was literally going to her house, picking up her trade-ins, bringing her back to the dealership, getting her into the car that she wanted to look at and buy, finalizing the car, getting the numbers, getting her into the finance. And then, hey, I couldn't, she was getting a little wary at that point. She didn't want to take delivery of the car the proper way. So I kept on top of her to saying, hey, I still owe you that part of the actual process, is to show you how the car works. But from, literally, hey, coming to her house to here are the keys, it was nice to deal with, work with you, it was about 2 hours, 2.5 hours. That's a pretty fast car deal in today's day.
Yeah, it is.
So what she ended up, she slaughtered me on the survey. And it was one of those things that, okay, not much I can do, but hey, at least I still have the spin money coming to me. I went to training in the beginning of December, end of the year, Christmas time, the whole 9 yards. Come back from training and I find out that they flipped a switch and attached the survey money to our spin money. And if you didn't get a survey, or if you were below board, so even if you sold a car and you weren't even affecting the dealership survey par. You just didn't have, people just forgot to put, or they didn't want to, or they didn't think it was that important to do a survey. You sold a certain amount of new cars, but didn't get surveys on them. You didn't affect it either way. You still lost the spin money. Okay. And that was basically one of those things. And at that time, my risk exposure was okay. They pulled me in and we were kind of blindsided. It wasn't the best cultural thing to do. I did say, well, okay, you're stealing, I got to go home. You guys are both dads. You both have daughters. I got to go home and tell my kids that daddy's company has stolen from him. And we can't go to Disney World this year because of that. Emotional reaction. Yeah. But their reaction was, well, that we're not stealing from you. I was like, then I'm really curious to see how you spin this, because looking back on that, my reaction should have been, should I get my lawyer on the phone now or wait until the meeting is over? Because that was an emotional reaction. But it's amazing to me how salespeople forget how to be salespeople when they get in front of managers or their employer. Mm-hmm. It really is very interesting. Yeah. But
no, it's true. And that's the thing. It's like, you've got to take the emotion out of this and take a minute to understand the other person's risk. Mm-hmm. But in your situation, I would have wanted to see exactly how that was written out, mm-hmm. right? So there were some specifics. But again, if I were consulting a car dealer, I'd say, this is the example I just gave you. It's like, a skater is not judged by the high and the low. They're judged by the ones in the middle. And so, there should be a little bit of a way to do that. But it could have been that dealership knew that. Mm-hmm. I didn't think anybody else knew that and shifted too much risk to you, which, is not the right way to do it. And when you shift risk too far to one person, they don't last. I remember many, 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 many years ago, and this may have been prior to you, and I meeting, but there was a gentleman at one of the radio stations who ended up taking a pad of orders mm-hmm. and going out and selling it himself and taking the cash, and then he quit. And what was interesting is like the outrage that occurred in the building. It's like, well, how could he do this? And that's outrageous. And this is that. I said, I don't know why you're surprised, is what I said. No, I'm younger at this time. I don't think I was mm-hmm. even 30. And they're looking at me like, what do you mean? I said, well, when you bring in somebody for what you're paying them, you give them 3 months to try to make it happen. And I know who this person was. And after the deal was done, you said, oh no, that belonged to somebody else, and you took it. Why are you surprised at all that this person's trying to feed his family? Because this guy was doing all the things you've asked him to do, but you know the truth that they weren't able to replace his income in 3 months. Mm-hmm. So you shifted all the risk on him, and now he's in a position where he can't feed his family. I said, did he do it? What he did was wrong? Yeah, but you shouldn't be surprised. I said, if you're on a pirate ship, why should you be surprised there's pirates on it? Yeah. That was the thing. That's the thing that bothered me, and it happens in so many places, But again, it was one of those things where, yes, what he did was wrong. Mm-hmm. There was no doubt. But if you create an environment where your company says you need to have 20 people on every single radio station just in a sales team, no one's going to make the money. And you know that. So what you've done is you've shifted to these people who are basically cannon fodder in the marketplace. And then when they go rogue, you're surprised. It's like, you shouldn't be surprised at all. You've put all the risk on them just to protect you because your boss has given you a directive that doesn't make any sense, and you haven't explained to them the risk that's happening here.
Right.
You could have very easily gone to your boss and said, if I need to put people on at $2,000 a month and you want 20 people on here, this is costing you $40,000 a month, and I'm going to show you how you're not going to be able to make $600,000 back, which is the multiple you require. Yeah. That is how you have the conversation, instead of going, yes, sir, and then basically lie to a bunch of people and shift the risk to them, and then they do things that they got to do in their own self-interest. It's nothing new. It's nothing new, and it happens a lot.
I think the takeaway is, for anybody searching for a job or, making a deal with some sort of an employer or anything like that, and it comes with experience and awareness of, like you said, that was the third time that you had gone through in that particular industry that it took you to figure out, okay, this is how the contracts looked. I'm going to make sure this plays out in my favor should things go south. A lot of that does come from experience and a willingness to, quite frankly, shoot from the hip, which you've always been very good at, and I've gleaned a lot of that from you. I've done that several times over the past several years, especially when you feel like you have nothing to lose. In the situation, you tend to be a little bit more bold. A lot of people go in, they give their best PR'd appearance when it comes to the interview, but they forget that the interview is also an interview from their standpoint. They're interviewing the employer. They got to make sure that it's a good fit for them as well. When you actually come on board, and then all of a sudden things start to change. For example, when I came on board with the collision company in 2013, there were 7 people. I want to say about 7 people in the first week that were just blown out of a cannon. And I don't know what the reasons were, but I was like, well, that seems a little bit of excessive. I came home to my wife and I said, we may be walking on eggshells. It just sounds like if all of a sudden I give the guy a wrong look, I could be out. There's an element of signaling that goes on, and I actually wrote that word down. And I've actually had a recent situation like this come up with a friend of mine who's actually still at the dealership. He was actually making phone calls, collection calls to clients who neglected to make their first month's payment. I'm going, what in the world are you doing? Why are you making collections calls? Did you hang the paper on this deal? He goes, no, of course you didn't. Your job is to sell flipping cars, dude. I mean, why are you making? Do you realize what you're saying to them? You're saying that it's okay to say, well, hey, he did it once, that we could just pile on more jobs. I said, you got to do a timeout on that and say, if I'm making collection calls, that's you're now asking me to do something in addition to all the other stuff I have to do to feed my family. Am I getting paid for this? And why are you asking me to do this first? Well, you need to be a team player. Well, okay, well, so do you. But it's amazing, like I said, how people forget how to how to sell when they're in front of managers and people that are up the chain. So, but that's signaling,
right? And in a way. Yeah, and a way to approach that in a slightly different manner is to approach it from just a straight business perspective, such as while you're doing collection calls, it's like, hey, I was doing some research and I was curious, what does a collection agent make on average per hour? And they'll say, I don't know, $12, $13 an hour. It's like, okay. I said, I did some math here, and me on the sales floor here, I make about $350 an hour, and I probably make you closer to $1,000 an hour when I'm working. I said, is this really the best use of time for the company? Based on the fact that I'm doing something that you could very easily get somebody to do for a 20th of what the value of me being out in front of a customer is.
Yeah.
Notice there's no emotion to that at all. But I'm saying the same thing. Like, you idiot, don't get me to do your dirty work. Go do this yourself, or go find your girlfriend to go do it. I mean, you could say it that way. Or you could just come around and say, listen, I just did some math on this. Is this really the best use of my time? Well, of course it is. I go, do you think that the owner or the shareholders would agree that, my time to the company is worth anywhere between $300 and $1,000 an hour, but you have me doing something that costs $13 an hour? I said, do you think they would agree with that?
Yeah.
And they're like, well, we just want you to be a team player. I am. That's why I'm bringing it up. That's how I do it. Like, I'm bringing it up.
One of the things, so what are the takeaways? People that are listening to this or watching this, what are some of the things they ought to keep in mind when they're entering into some sort of a deal this week or looking into getting a new job and things. They're going through the interview process. They haven't gotten to the negotiation table yet. What is your advice or some like 3 to 5 different tips you would give them if you have something like that?
Be real with yourself and know what triggers you to walk away from it. I think a lot of people are conditioned that once they get into an interview, that once someone makes the offer, they should take it. I think there's just this condition of like, I want the job. Okay, we're going to give you the job. And so you just lie down and do it. I mean, there should be something to the effect of like, what's it, what do I see or what do I have in front of me that says, listen, I'm going to walk away from this. Determine where that point is. Like, I'm going to walk away on it. But then once you know that, don't be emotional about it if they're not able to give you what you want. But I'd say in life, everything that you're planning to go and do, you should be willing to walk away from. Mm-hmm. I mean, except for people that you love, because there's a difference between business and love, right? So if it's something you love, you got to stick in. But every situation I go into now, it's like, am I willing to walk away for certain things and have that list? And then again, understand how contracts are structured. And ask questions. If you're given an employment agreement, it's like ask. So if somebody says, hey, I'm going to give you an agreement for 3 years. The question should be, where is it in here that says what my remuneration is if I don't get to 3 years? Mm-hmm. And maybe they'll say, oh, it's right here. It's like, okay. So what it's saying is if it's not on performance or other reasons, then you can end this. Yeah. It's like, well, then what's my compensation for? Because what you've asked now is to take away my 3 years of potential earning on my end to help you make money there. But what if you decide to terminate it and I've given up opportunities that could have occurred during that period of time? Mm-hmm. I said, what's the value of that? I mean, those are the kind of questions I would ask. Really and then as far as what you're paid, do a lot of research and don't just look at like salary.com and say, oh, hey, a salesperson makes this or a marketing person makes this. Try to figure out what the company makes, what it's expected to make, what you're responsible, that delta, and then figure out what the industry average is for compensation based on that. And the stage of the business will determine that. So, for instance, if somebody became a sales leader of an established tech company, maybe they're going to be, a vice president of sales for established tech company. Mm-hmm. Their compensation may be somewhere between 2 and 3% perhaps of total sales. Mm-hmm. But if that same person was then injected into a startup, that number may be 30 to 40% of mm-hmm. sales, even if they hit the same number, because the risk of being in a startup is much higher than the risk of being in an established company. Right? Yeah. So just do some research about not just what somebody will make, but like what's their methodology of actually paying people. And then you come to it with a business perspective. And I'll give you an example. I had an overseas assignment where a person came to me and they offered me an amount of money and I declined. And they said, okay, well, we have other people that'll do this. And I said, okay, that's fine with me, because that was just a weird emotional posture. I said, the reason why they're saying yes is because they don't know why. Mm-hmm. And they said, what do you mean why? I said, they don't know why I'm asking for what I'm asking, and I'm going to explain it to you. And then you have the right to say yes or no. And then I explained the whole math and methodology getting through it, and they went, that makes perfect sense. I go, so do we have a deal? So that's what I do. I just take all the emotion out of it. I step back. What's the phrase? Don't let them hijack your amygdala. It's that little thing in the back of your brain that makes you go fight or flight. Just breathe and say, let me explain to you where I'm at. And then yeah. And so, when I told them, I said, if this is what your expected numbers are, and they're saying yes to this offer, they're not wise enough in their career to understand that they're actually taking a haircut on actually what their true value is to deliver this. And once I explained it all, they went, oh, yeah. I said, you would have hired somebody who would have taken the money and wouldn't have been able to deliver. I said, that's even worse for you. Because you would have said, hey, we're going to do this. And he says, well, he'll do it for this. And then he doesn't get it done. Well, you just lost this. The risk is too much on you now because you hired somebody who couldn't do it. Yeah. So, Peter, where can people find you, and what are you doing these days? What do you want to promote or push out there? What I try to do is I help businesses on an interim basis globally. So if somebody needs help with, go-to-market strategies, sales team development, just overarching needs, like if you need a generalist to run an operation until you can find somebody who can be that specialist in the space, I'm your guy, because I really am kind of a Swiss Army knife of skills in terms of the business. So, if somebody says, hey, I need a bunch of things done, it's like I can lead your organization, I can market your organization, I can sell your organization, I can, I can do anything in terms of that.
Yeah.
So, but the value is you can often retain me in a manner that doesn't require you to compensate me full time. So I call it interval or interim management. So say for instance, say you had a marketing coordinator and you're paying that marketing coordinator a full-time salary of maybe $4,000 or $5,000 a month, but you realize that they just don't have enough skill sets. Well, at my experience level, I might be able to help you for maybe 8 or 10 hours in a month and get the same throughput. I said, you have the ability to afford that. Plus, you also have the executive level experience of like, I've seen it, I've been there, and I've done that. So if you wanted to rent me part-time, you could. If you wanted to put me in assignments from weeks to months globally, anywhere. I mean, the only thing I don't do is I don't speak multiple languages, but business is English everywhere. But suppose you had a business and you wanted to be overseas and say, I just need somebody to watch my call center in the Philippines to make sure everything's working. I can do it. I need you to travel to Asia and work with clients, for months at a time. Lead a digital initiative for your organization. In other words, I can do a lot. No. So really, I'm kind of wide open. And if you're not looking for a permanent solution, I would definitely be your guy. If you want a permanent solution, of course, we could talk too. But I kind of like the freedom that I have.
Right on. Well, that is, I think that's a pretty good primer this week. And of course, hopefully everybody that's watching and is going to be watching sees why I hold you in that fraternity of like 4 of the smartest people I know. I don't know what that says about me.
Oh, that's very kind. Hey, you're not too shabby either. If there's one thing to say about Jim. Jim is actually one of the brightest people I know too. And I said the only thing I could say is that his heart sometimes gets in the way. I'm like, break it off. Oh
yeah, I'm totally emotional.
But you know what? But there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with it. But no, I'm gonna say this guy here. If you need him for anything, humanizing any person in the personal branding space, or really good voiceover work, or any of that, he's your guy.
Right on, brother.
And he's real with you too. He's not going to be like those other people in the industry that are pretty phony. It's true. We know them. We know them.
That's very true. Very true. But thanks, Peter, for joining me. I'm gonna get off now, and if anybody has any questions for Peter, they could find you on Facebook, Instagram too.
On LinkedIn as well. I'm Peter P. Sorensen on LinkedIn. That's a good way. I like to stay in that space. I am PP Sorensen at Twitter. Okay.
So it's at PP Sorensen. Same thing with Instagram and everything like that. Okay. So, and I always encourage you to keep on doing more stuff like this. Especially, you should do a weekly video talking about different topics as well. I always encourage you to do that. And I think you need to start doing that. Yeah. You know that though. We've had conversations.
And it's kind of a weird dodge, but it's like I've got some really little kids, and that makes it tough. But I see the value in this. Yeah. I know, dude. I know. I know. But maybe I need to take more vitamins or something.
I always tell people it's a matter of the value of what we're putting out. If you look at the background, I've got a fan spinning over my head. It's not how pretty it is. It's about what you're talking about that matters. So, for what it's worth.
That's how I got my wife. I go, it's not about this. It's coming out here.
She fell in love with 100%. The brain.
And I keep her drunk. That's how she stays with me. So there's that.
All right. On that note, I think we'll end here. Thanks for joining me. Stay tuned. We'll keep on doing this on a weekly basis, and I'll try and get these downloaded and put up a little bit more cleanly. So the beginning of this will be cut off, and we'll get it all up and taken care of. So thank you, Peter, for joining me, and we'll probably be a regular guest as this thing kind of plays out. So
cool. Well, yeah, Jim, I appreciate it. Keep on going on. If there's anything else you need from me, let me know.
Will do, brother. Take care. You have a good week.
All right.
Bye-bye.
See ya.